In this episode, I get to sit down with John Whitehall. John is a consultant with Sandler Training. Since the beginning of March, John has been struggling with changing his business strategy around, which includes going completely virtual in training his clients. John talks about some of his challenges that he is facing right now in changing his business strategy, as well as gives advice on how to handle sales during a time like this without exploiting a bad situation that people are going through. Just check it out and give it a listen. Good morning, John.
Morning, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing, buddy?
How was your Easter?
It was okay. It was different because obviously we didn't get to really do too much.
Yeah, right.
Not good. How was your Easter?
Really kind of uneventful. Didn't do much. I went paddleboarding up at Blue Marsh.
Well, how in the world did we just go from 60 to 70 degree weather down to like 40 degrees Saturday and Sunday? I mean, that was just ridiculous.
Yeah, and the rest of this week isn't all that warm either. So,
well, then let's open up with this a little bit. So obviously you're running into all these technology issues now that we've switched over to doing work from home. How is that working out for you, John? Changing your whole structure and how you're selling and how you're doing things.
I just got off a call with, I think there were 35 other Sandler trainers, and we were really trying to just explore that and share best practices. And everybody's doing something similar to what I'm doing. In many cases, everybody's had some sort of loss as far as their client base goes, or they put off training. So there's that. So we're all trying to figure out, okay, how do we get some kind of traction? And so some guys are just flat out giving it away. I don't know that I'm so keen on that, but I am developing kind of I wouldn't sell it this way certainly, but maybe it's like a Sandler Light that I'm coming up with. That's kind of instead of a full 12 hours of training, which is my typical foundations run, maybe I'm doing one for less money that's only 8 hours. It's 8 one-hour sessions. It's faster. It doesn't have the assessments tied to it and some of the other bells and whistles, but it's a great way to, for companies who maybe aren't sure about what I do and never invested in sales training, it's a way for them to kind of stick their toe in the pond without it being too painful.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I'm doing. So we're still looking at doing some sort of a weekly series, a roundtable, which will start in 2 weeks, week and a half. It'll be a week from this Thursday, and we're, it's probably going to be Ride the Wave of Success with John Whitehall. We kind of came up with a handle for it. We were thinking about couch surfing, the surfing thing, and I finally kind of dawned on me, I think it's more about the wave aspect than it is the surfing aspect, though can't do one without the other. So we're doing that, and then, like I said, I'm filling a full-blown public class right now, and then I have a couple of small companies who I'm after, but right now, everything is virtual, and I'm trying to get a conversation started with my largest supplier down in Florida, and they're in the gun business. So right now, guns are selling like crazy. They don't need my help, but they engaged me, and I did some training for them back in February. So I'm trying to push them in the direction of, you can do this, maybe not better, but you can certainly do it cleaner and faster doing this platform. That, to give you some idea what a client looks like, 50 salespeople, okay? And the original was they would all get 2-day boot camps or things like that, where I would fly to their offices. And they've got offices in Reno, and they've got them in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Rochester, New York, and Florida, and so forth. And so now I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, so if we do this on a weekly basis, I could perhaps do the same show on 2 days a week and have potentially 25 in each. In a perfect world, you'd have that balance, but maybe it's 30 and 20 or something like that. But there's a way to kind of deliver the content, I think, in a way that's really maybe more convenient for them right now. But I think what they have to understand and realize is that the things that they were concerned about prior are going to still be there when they go through this wave that they're in right now, because their sales are tremendous. I mean, everybody has fear. The doomsday preppers are back and people like that. So they're looking at, all these different issues. When they hired me, these things are all going to come back. And oh, by the way, they need to have good conversations now, because these trees don't grow to the sky, and
Sure.
This too will pass. And so, yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but I guess I'm now looking at my world as completely virtual. Regardless of whether folks contracted me as in person or not. Anything I sell right now, if they give the all clear next month, I'm still going to be continuing on the virtual path. So
Wow.
Trying to understand what it would look like going forward with two tiers of business, right? Where one would be in person and the other is virtual. And I'm thinking maybe all of my public training becomes virtual going forward. And the only time they get me in person are the people who, I go in and work with a full-blown company. So, yeah, it's shifty right now. How's that for a good word? Not a good sales word.
So before we go too much further, because I do want to follow up on that, but before we go much further, tell me a little bit about you, what you do, because you mentioned Sandler Training already. So talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just a little bit about some of the fun stuff you do, because I know you do a lot of crazy stuff like the surfing, you do the longboarding. Give me a little bit.
I have this crazy career path where, I was in the fast food industry when I first started, because it was hard to get a job in the early '80s. So unemployment was fairly high. Reaganomics hadn't kicked in yet, so it was a tough time to be looking for my first career. And then I got hired by the local Anheuser-Busch outfit, and so I spent 19 years in the beer industry as an Anheuser-Busch, a Budweiser distributor, and about midway through my experience in that industry, we were the first Yingling lager distributors in the modern era. So I've got this really cool kind of claim to fame that you go to the brewery for your tour. And, before they dump you off in the gift shop, they give you a little bit of sampling. And my picture's actually in the brewery. So my son thinks this is the pinnacle of my lifelong achievement and so forth. And then, as businesses evolve, there was a lot of pressure in that industry to consolidate. And my partner and I were forced out. And then we spent 3.5 years in the RV manufacturing industry. So that was travel trailers and campers and things like that. Pretty much 34 feet to 19 feet, something like that. Things you could tow behind a small pickup truck. Spent some time post Hurricane Katrina on the ground selling trailers to house people who were displaced by the storm. And then after, what was interesting about that was we sold a ton of trailers into the market. FEMA bought 70,000 trailers. They probably needed only 30. And a year or two afterwards, they started selling these back into the marketplace at 25 cents in the dollar and really kind of crushed the industry. So at age 45 or 46, I was looking for my next great challenge. And I listed myself. If you think about back in this time frame, Joe, was probably about 06, and this is when Career Builder and Monster.com were the big advertisers on the Super Bowl, right? It was kind of really the birth of internet hiring and so forth. So I knew nothing about this, so I hired some consultants who went out and marketed me very, very well. And about 6 months later, I get a call from a firearms distributor out of Ohio, and went to work for them. Ran a local office down in Morgantown, Pennsylvania for a couple of years. Apparently did a good job. And then after that, they asked me to move to Ohio and and run the whole operation. So Claudia and I picked up stakes and went to Ohio and spent almost a little over 7 years running a fairly large sales operation. This is where we really got introduced to Sandler Training. They're our facilitator. And we almost tripled the size of the business in 6 years that I was there. So that was a really great feather in my cap. But, over time, as the business got larger and larger, I became more and more miserable. And, Claudia and I knew we needed to do something different. And when I was talking to the folks at Sandler, they made me wildly successful. And my friend and mentor in that area is a guy by the name of Bill Bartlett. And I said, I'm just no longer having any fun anymore. But I said, you're lucky having a lot of fun. I want to do what you do. And that was about 4.5 years ago. And it'd be 5 years ago this June that I actually had that conversation. And then by Thanksgiving, Christmas of 2015, I had left the firearms industry, moved back to Reading where we had a growing family. We now have 7 grandkids. And moved back here, reconnected with my family, and we've been really, really happy since. As far as me and what I like to do, it's funny. I'm really gifted at all the balance sports. Anything you can stand on and ride, I can do. Back in the 70s, I was a water skier. I learned to barefoot water ski. I learned to windsurf. I learned to ride surf jets, jet skis back when jet skis were something that you stood on. I was a surfer my entire life. A snow skier. Taught myself to snowboard along the way. So anything you could pretty much stand on and ride, I can do. I've got these really funny looking flat feet that are wide and give me a really good fitting. Now, people have told me the funniest thing they've ever seen is watching me dribble and shoot a basketball. I'm really handicapped with hand-eye coordination, anything you throw. I had a friend once told me the toughest workout he ever had in his life was a half-hour game of Frisbee with me because he had never had there was never any idea where it was going to go. It was so random, and he spent his time just running all over the field that we were playing in. So I still love those things. I try to do them as much as I possibly can. I still surf. I'd love to stand up paddleboarding. Joe, skateboarding is a fun thing for me. So, I don't golf. No one ever eats it playing golf. No one ever wipes out playing golf. I need a little bit of thrill of speed and perhaps a little bit of danger to get me excited.
No, I think that's totally applicable to what we're talking about today when it concerns things like sales and how you're running your business. Obviously, we're in a time right now where everybody's changing their strategy. Everybody's changing what they have to do because they're working from home or they're doing all these crazy things like just maybe sitting around and trying to just get projects done that have been sitting around for forever. But what I appreciate about your story, John, is in moving from Ohio back to PA, doing all these different things for your personal career path. You're not adverse to taking risks, and you're not adverse to going through hard times, and in fact you actually encourage it in just your lifestyle with the surfing, with the longboarding. I know you got me involved in longboarding, and I'm finding it's changing my personality a little bit. But right now, what I want to focus on is with sales. A lot of people right now are probably going to be struggling with, okay, how do we handle this time? How do we change our focus? How do we actually still sell during a time where people might not be buying? What are some things that you're facing that could be challenges, but things that you're also facing that you're like, hey, this is an obstacle that if we get over it, it's going to be a huge benefit to us in the sales world?
That's a great question, Joe. So one of the things that I'm telling my clients is, and we teach cookbooking, and a cookbook is in selling is what are the daily activities, weekly activities, monthly activities that you need to be doing consistently to grow your business and hit your goals. Now, what we realized is that the cookbook that we built back in January and February no longer applies during this time that we're in right now. So we almost need a coronavirus cookbook. And then the other thing I think we have to think about is when we come out of this, let's say it's in June, let's say it's in July, I guarantee you that where we're heading is not going to be in that close resemblance to where we've been. Okay, this is a life-changing, both personally and professionally for most people. I think that businesses who struggle with remote employees, people working from home, are now forced to do it, and I think there's going to be many more companies who are embracing it on the other side. I also think there's a lot of people out there who are looking for new opportunities, let's say. They're spending an awful lot of time home at the couch, and you can only watch so much Netflix, right? So people are starting to look at ways that they can better themselves. But the number one thing that I'm running into is many people are really stuck right now. They're still in shock mode of this change, and because they maybe are not selling as actively as they once did, or perhaps they don't feel like it's appropriate to sell at all. And I really have a hard time getting my head around that, because there are businesses that are growing and thriving during this. And it's not that they're taking advantage of an unfortunate event that's happening globally. It's just their businesses. People are gravitating towards their business. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you haven't been to a Lowe's or a Home Depot recently, you need to go at least just ride by a parking lot, because they are full. They are blowing and going. And I think this is going to be a year where businesses who support the homeowner, people who do renovations, people who do roofs, siding, put pools in, do renovations, additions, landscaping, and the like. I think all of these businesses are going to thrive on the other side of this, because let's face it, I don't know about you, I'm not anxious to get on a cruise ship anytime soon.
Right.
I think people are going to be skittish about getting on airplanes anytime soon. I think that close contact, this social distancing that we're doing right now, even when things normalize, there's going to be a change in how we interact with each other in public. So I think that there's a great opportunity for these home, I don't want to call them home improvement, but let's say businesses that support homeowners, I think are really going to thrive this year, because I think we're looking at probably the year of the staycation. People are going to be staying at home. I think that landscape has shifted. So, one of the things I saw last week that I couldn't believe, Joe, and this was on Friday morning, and it was about an hour before I talked with my coach. And I get up in the morning, and my typical routine is I grab my iPad, make myself a cup of coffee, check the weather, sample some of the news channels, and then, once I'm half hour in, I go to work. And what I saw last week really surprised me, and it was on the Weather Channel, and I had 2 local funeral homes advertising back to back. Okay, so now consider this. So one was, is it Stetzel's? I'm not sure. And then the other was Kuhn up here in West Reading. Back to back, and they're both selling the same concept. And you can imagine a funeral home's messaging very kind of somber and low key, and these were no exception. But they were talking about during these uncertain times. Their messaging had definitely changed during these uncertain times, and they're talking about traditional services. They're showing almost a Zoom meeting of what a funeral could look like, including the picture scroll that you typically are seeing when you go to somebody's service now. They're showing pictures of the actual funeral home, and in place of people who were actually physically attending, because we're not, they have white balloons tied to all the chairs representing the people who were attending virtually. So there's an industry who has very much shifted, and both were very similar commercials, but shifted and pivoted, okay, because of the situation that we're in. Now, their messaging will change when we change back, as I think everybody's will change, but I think that's just an example of, pre-coronavirus, right? Need a different method now that we're in it, and then wherever we're going long term, it's probably going to be yet another message.
Sure.
So I think these are really trying times, and there are two types of companies that I'm seeing. I'm seeing those who are proactive and they're really trying to keep things going, stay engaged, and so forth. And there are many who are sitting on the sidelines just waiting. And they're both valid strategies, except the people sitting on the sidelines are going to be, I think, very surprised that when this comes back, whatever that looks like again, they're going to find themselves in a very crowded space. And I think it could be very difficult for them to attract clients or even become noticed during that time. I think we're in for some interesting challenges as we roll through this.
No, I can definitely agree with that. Like I've been looking at my business and trying to figure out, okay, I understand right now for video marketing, a lot of people aren't paying the money to do it. I get it. But I also understand that right now is an opportune time to start creating the influence in just advertising myself, because there's going to come a point in time when people are able to actually spend the money that they're going to recognize now, especially in my field, where it's like, well, video, why would that be important? Well, now, after spending the last month and a half to 2 months in quarantine and being at home all the time, they're going to understand that their message is changing. How do you capitalize on a situation without exploiting it? Like, this is one sensitive situation where it's like, hey, we could easily sell and satisfy. I know with Sandler, you guys talk about your pain points and things like that. But how do you satisfy this whole advertising thing without exploiting the things people are going through and exploiting the whole situation that we're dealing with? Because I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with right now.
I think they have to reframe how they're looking at this and understand that whatever business we're in. Hey, so I'm in the business of teaching people how to sell. How am I being opportunist by continuing to sell programs? I think everybody has to ask themselves that question. Yeah, we feel bad about there are people dying and so forth, and all the things that will weigh on us emotionally as we go through this. But at the end of the day, I think we have a responsibility as business owners to continue to provide the services and solutions that people are looking for and that they want. And if people, it would be obnoxious to say, okay, I'm having a coronavirus special.
Right.
I mean, what could be more obnoxious than that, right? If you can spell coronavirus in your email to me, right? Code word coronavirus, right? You'll save 20% off the training. Now, that would be really irresponsible and obnoxious, okay?
Sure.
But if I just went out and I offered a reduced rated training as an alternative to sitting on your butt watching Netflix all day, there are some people, some individuals who are into continuous learning and companies who are looking to provide content that's meaningful to their employees. I don't think there's anything wrong with me going out and selling programs. And I can think of very few. Now, okay, so if you're selling masks and respirators and, you're sounding like Vince the ShamWow guy, not very appropriate. I think we have to understand our messaging. I think we have to, our tonality and how we present ourselves, I think has an awful lot to do with it. And I think that if we can provide value to our clients, and not just our clients, our prospects, those who we want to be clients, I think they'll remember that down the road. One of the things, this is the best time to call and resurrect clients and just have conversations with people. I think this is the rebirth of conversations where, before it was pretty much this dump and run fashion of communicating. We're texting, we're emailing, all these sorts of things. We're leaving message, and it's kind of a dump and run thing. Now you really have an opportunity to pick up the phone and call somebody, and your chances of getting them has never been greater. They're not going to be in a meeting. They're not out to lunch. I understand golf is illegal in Pennsylvania, so they're not on the golf course. They don't have all those excuses, and they're probably not in the same building with their receptionist. So your decision makers, people who you really look to hire you, are going to be more available than they ever would before. And I think you really just start with a conversation, something like, "How you doing? What are you seeing in your industry? How's this impacted your company? What things are you doing differently? What's going on in your hometown? How's your family?" These are really great questions to connect with people, and they aren't very salesy. And I'm not suggesting that you're having a conversation to connect, and then all of a sudden you go into sales mode. I think it is a good practice, though, to set up, "Hey, listen, when things normalize, would it be all right if I called you? Or how about we set up a meeting in a month? Yeah, I know there's a likelihood that it's going to get canceled. We probably have to push it back. But I feel more comfortable if we were on the calendar that we were going to talk in 30 days and not 5." Right?
Sure.
Some sort of an outcome. So these are the things I'm talking to my people about, my clients, about getting them rolling. I think it's okay to sell. I think we just have to be careful of our messaging.
It sounds more like you're talking about just being human in this point, because you're addressing this whole aspect of, "Hey, I got to connect with you, say how you're doing, what's going on in your hometown, how's your family doing," things like that. Actually caring about your client base, or caring about your potential clients. And that's one thing I've noticed about you in your underneath the Sandler training and everything else. It's the whole model of training is completely different than traditional sales models. And it's just an interesting perspective to go across. Instead of trying to sell the product, you're just going and checking in and saying, "Hey, what are you as a human, you as a business owner, what is something you're struggling with, and what's something that you need in this moment?"
So one of the things we talk about in Sandler Training is that we want to be vulnerable and we want to be disarmingly honest. And when we do those things, we're able to really make great connections with people. Right now, the thing that I know we're all struggling. We're all not quite okay right now, right? And so I think it's a really great way to reach out to people and really ask them some connection type questions. Make it about them. Get them speaking back to you. I guarantee you, both sides of that conversation, both are going to feel great. And even if you haven't done any business with the person you're talking to, maybe they're a prospect, or maybe you had a conversation somewhere in your past, I guarantee you'll be memorable. And when things do normalize, they're going to be more likely to pick up a phone call from you because you reached out to them. You cared during a time where I'm sure that they were feeling some various degrees of despair, desperation. They've got fear, doubt, worry, all of those things that we're all facing right now. And, just picking up the phone and just having a conversation that starts with, "Hey, Joe, how you doing?" I think is very welcome.
Sure. No, I definitely agree. I've seen it already with the people who have checked in with me, because I know there are people who are still working from home who have called me, who I still am accountable to, as far as I have a financial planner or this person over here, and they're checking in and saying, "Hey, how are you actually doing during this time?" That means a lot more than somebody 5 months down the road after this all takes place who just sends me an invoice saying, "Hey, now that we're back on track, let's start rolling everything out again."
Yeah. And I wouldn't worry so much about the money. I would just worry about presenting some sort of value, providing some sort of value, so that you'll make yourself memorable. I'm giving away a little bit of content here and there. So I'm doing a lot of free webinars and things like that. It's typically, this is what I get paid for. But right now, for people who weren't quite sure, have never invested in sales training before, this is a great way to give them a little bit of a taste of who I am and what I do. And when things normalize and they're going to get to a certain point, you hope they think of me. They think of you, Joe. At the end of the day, there are certainly other people who do video work, right? And there's other people who do sales training. At the end of the day, they're buying you. Okay, let's face it, they're buying you and what you bring to the table. So in a way, through this point, we're this is really a continued version of bonding and rapport, and bonding and rapport trumps everything. My favorite Sandler rule is this one: all things being equal, people buy from who they trust. All things being unequal, they still buy from who they trust. So if we can build trust by having these nurturing sounding phone calls where we're asking people about how they're feeling during these difficult times, I think that's a win if you can get somebody to really open up and talk to you.
Sure. And I really think trust during this time is extremely important. Knowing who to trust and what to trust in a time when you're extremely vulnerable, that's a huge deal. So how does somebody who's doing sales, how do they come off showing more that they're more trustworthy than a typical person? Obviously, we talked about the vulnerability and the checking in, but is there anything else you might be able to provide right there without giving too much of your own information away?
Sure. Yeah, and I think the main thing is make the conversation about them, right? And if they truly care and if they're engaged, they're going to ask you about your business and how you're doing. But one of the rules that another Sandler rule is the 70-30 rule, and that when you're having an interaction with a client, you want the client to be doing 70% of the talking. So how do we do that? We do that by having questions, right? The right kind of questioning strategy. So if you think about the questions I mentioned earlier, right? How you doing? What's happening in your industry? What's happening with your company? What are you seeing in the marketplace? How's this impacted what you're doing right now? Because it certainly is a bit different than it was in January. And these are really great open-ended questions to get people going. And then the way to keep it going is, tell me more. Keep them talking. One thing we know about business owners, especially if they grew the business themselves, there's a tremendous amount of pride in talking about themselves and the business. So we're just giving them an opportunity to do so. And, as far as relationships go, you may just become a trusted advisor by allowing them to open up to you and kind of spill their guts. If there's some sort of trust, they're going to be very revealing to you. And I think, as I said to you, we need to be disarmingly honest and open about our own businesses. So if they're going to share, you have to be willing to share too. But I think these are great conversations to have right now.
That's awesome. Well, John, in closing this out, you've talked about the webinars and things that you're doing. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you during this time, or they wanted to follow up on things that you're teaching, how would they be able to get a hold of you? What are some things that you are offering during this time that people could reach out to you and connect to you?
Well, as I said, we're starting this a weekly half-hour session called Ride the Wave of Success with John Whitehall. I'm not sure what the date is, but it'll start the week from this coming Thursday at 11 a.m. I do a lot of marketing on LinkedIn. My website is johnwhitehall.sandler.com. Lots of free resources there as well. Or you can just reach out to me at john.whitehall@sandler.com. Easy.
That's all. That's awesome, John. I appreciate your time. I think this was a great conversation, at least a great starter for a lot of people. So I'm looking forward to see what we can do for you through all this and how you might be able to help others in presenting themselves and selling. So I appreciate your time today.
Hey, you too, Joe.
Thanks for watching Social Through Distance. Hopefully you have found this beneficial to your life. There'll be links for our guests in the description, as well as a link where you can watch or listen to this episode's interview in its entirety. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. If you're interested in being a part of these conversations, you can reach me at the email address below. I'd love to talk to you and see how you are handling things and how you're looking to move forward as we're slowly being released to come back to work.